Foundation myths of Korea. Colonial period, Japanese eugenics, and theories on racial purity.
In this next section, we are going to examine the colonial period and the assimilation policy of Imperial Japan that was imposed upon Koreans, and how they also used the Tangun myth at this time.
What is eugenics?
So, for example, from 1910 to 1945, the Imperial Japanese developed eugenics and theories on racial purity. Part of this was to preserve Japanese racial purity, but this also had an influence on Korean ideas and concepts of racial purity. And so during this time, Japan developed various academic fields such as archaeology, history, anthropology, in order to support their theories on eugenics. There were also race-based Japanese claims that Japan and Korea actually shared the same ancestry and that they originally were from the same peoples, but that at some point in history, the two branched off. And this was an important theory for the Japanese because it helped to justify colonial rule. How did this do that? Well, for the Japanese, if they could say that the Japanese and the Koreans share an ancestry, come from the same origins, then this emphasizes that they have some kind of similarities, and that this helps to justify the Japanese and their presence in Korea because they have that shared ancestry. But it also explains why Japan became more advanced, at least from the Japanese perspective. And they can say that during before the colonial period, they had been able to modernize and develop their military because they had at some point in history branched off and become more modern. And so because they had become more modern, they were now helping their ancestral brethren. In response to this, Korean historians wrote counter-race-based claims. Some did not subscribe to the Nisen Dosoron, and instead we see a nationalist history that began to emerge. And in this national history, they try to identify and emphasize Korea's independent and their own advanced origins. Some examples of these historians were Choi Nam-sun and Shin Chae-ho. And their claims were that the Korean people descended from a 5,000-year unbroken line tracing back to Tangun. And that's where Tangun plays an important role. So if we look at Korean eugenics, the strategy for optimizing heritable characteristics, which are often racial, this was the general concept and idea. And for the Japanese, this was used for assimilation, to show that because we come from shared origins, the Japanese and the Koreans could once again come together. The Koreans also had their own theories on eugenics. So scholars such as Yoon Chio, Lee Gap-soo, they formed the Joseon Eugenics Society. They also printed their own journal. And they believed that racial purity was a defining feature of Korean identity and an imperative to preserving Korean identity. However, for the Japanese, there was a certain amount of assimilation that was necessary during the colonial period. And so they promoted slogans such as Japan and Korea as one. And In a way, this is a very contradictory assimilation policy because on the one hand, it incorporates Korea, but on the other hand, it excludes it. So there's a simultaneous inclusion and exclusion that occurs. And then when we get into the later colonial period, particularly when Japan participates in World War II and has to mobilize all of its resources for the war, including its colonies, then we have forced assimilation policies that are implemented in Korea. For example, all Koreans from 1937 were told that they had to worship Shinto, which is a part of, which also includes emperor worship. There were also many Koreans that were forced into labor. They were moved to different parts of the Japanese Empire, including up in Manchuria, and basically they were forced slave labor. There were comfort women who were forced sexual slaves. And a variety of these kinds of very violent and aggressive assimilation policies in order to bolster the Japanese war effort.
These are the keywords for this class: eugenics, assimilation policy,